This is a recorded version of a presentation I gave today, the 30th of June 2023 in Durham at the BALEAP PIM about AI. So what I'm going to talk about is why we should be letting students use tools to adjust their writing and assessments. So first I'm going to talk about the problem which I see as academic English. There's been lots of talk about how AI is this problem we need to solve, but actually I think academic English is the problem in the context that I'm talking about. The solution, I think, are what I'm calling automated language adjustment tools, or ALATS. I made up this term myself because I wanted a term that encompassed any type of tool that you can use to automatically change your written language. So that includes anything like machine translation, like Google Translate, Quillbot, WordTune, ChatGPT, of course, anything that you can use, even Microsoft Word, when that changes your spelling and gives you grammar suggestions. And I use the word adjustment there rather than correction very intentionally for reasons which I hope will become clear later in the presentation. So I will discuss that, and then I'm going to talk about how I integrated ALATS into a module I've taught this term, and then I will talk about the results from that trial and some suggestions for the future. So the use of ALATS have been traditionally banned in any L2 education, so anything you can use to change your written work. The only proof of language proficiency has been what comes from your brain. So even before digital tools, we're talking about even using dictionaries in assessments hasn't been allowed. But now ALATs are widely available, easily accessible. I know I never handwrite anything anymore, even when I'm just typing a message on my phone. There's always something they're correcting or suggesting in my text, so they are used in writing all the time. So I just want to give some justification for their usage by L2 writers from a social justice perspective. So some background just about our field, EAP. It exists due to the dominance of academic English as a lingua franca of knowledge, and English is a lingua franca of knowledge because of colonialism, because the history of it being spread around the world due to colonialism. Students come to us for a degree from English medium institutions because it gives them prestige and power, and we make a lot of money from international student fees coming to our universities. So already we benefit a lot from this situation, and our students still have to adhere to the academic English standards, so it disadvantages them because they have this barrier to entry into prestige higher education. So now I just want to talk a little bit about what academic English is, because it has been kind of, everyone thinks they kind of understand what it is, but it is actually pretty hard to define. I've heard it called clear. This I would dispute a lot of the time, because you have to ask, who is it clear to? I know I've been speaking English my whole life, and I find it sometimes hard to read academic English, that journal articles that I'm trying to read. My students also will say that it's clear, and then I'll ask them, oh, it's clear, is it? So how well do you understand it? And they don't understand it. It takes them a long time it takes them a lot of effort and a lot of learning to be able to read academic English. I've heard it called concise. I think it's meant to be concise. I don't know if it very often is. I think a lot of the time it is, you have run-on sentences. I can find sentences in academic English very hard to pass. Descriptive, I think it's definitely descriptive, but then I don't think that's a feature unique to academic English. All other languages, all other varieties of English are equally as descriptive as academic English is. Is it complex? It's definitely complex, but I don't know if that's a benefit. I think we want our ideas, hopefully, to be spread in a way which is clear and understandable to the most amount of people possible, and making language complex just makes it harder to understand. I know in our course, our marking criteria gives students more marks for more complex use of language, and I often think to myself, why do we want that? Don't we want them to be clear and understandable rather than complex? I think it's formulaic, and I think this is part of the problem. So because it's supposed to be objective and detached, then you've got this problem of it being kind of like an algorithm, and this is why AI is so good at it. If you're writing like an algorithm, then AI, which is trained on this, is going to be good at writing it as well. So academic English has kind of created this problem a little bit for itself. I think it's performative, so people write in this way because it's seen as educated and intelligent. You sound intelligent when you write like this. We have to ask, whose English is it? So traditionally it's comes from wealthy white communities. And is it even necessary? Like I said, other forms of English are equally as descriptive. So now I just want to show you an example of that. I'm going to show you a paragraph from a text which is published in an academic publication. I just want you to read it. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read it and just see if you can understand what this person is talking about. So, by reading this, I wanted you to see that you can use other forms of other varieties of English can be used to give academic to write about academic subjects. Reading this, I understand it very well. Actually, I find it a lot more accessible and easy to understand than a lot of the academic English that I read. It maybe takes me a little bit more effort because I'm not used to this type of writing, but then why shouldn't I have to do some of the work to understand things? Also, I think it has the additional benefit of representing the voice and the identity of this writer. I can tell what group of people that this writer comes from, which is something I can't in most academic English. I think there are people who are going to have views about this type of writing, about the education of the writer, but that's not something inherent in the language. That's a prejudicial view of that group. So that takes me on to my next slide, which is that undervalued varieties of English are not accepted in academic writing, which is a form of social prejudice. It's exclusion and it's a lack of linguistic representation in academia. It's a form of linguistic gatekeeping, so even like IELTS is not fit for purpose for assessing unstandardized varieties of English. A lot of my students come from Nigeria and India, and they are their first language is English. It's just Nigerian English or Indian English, and yet they can't pass the IELTS test at a sufficient level to go straight into their degree. They have to do our EAP courses first. Also, even racialized speakers, even if they do adhere to these standards, they are still can be seen as deficient. And I like this idea that Megan Figueroa developed of the psychological paywall of academia. So there's a financial paywall in that you have to pay to access journal articles. But there's also the psychological paywall in that if you don't read or write academic English, there's a barrier for you into academia. There's also an increase of social linguistic labor you have to perform and an increased cognitive load to access academia. And so the more different an L1 is, whether that be a different language or whether it be a different variety of English from academic English, the less accessible academia becomes, and this just further privileges already privileged groups. There's not been a lot of studies on ChatGPT yet because it's very new and everyone's still dealing with it. But I think a good example, which is a similar thing, is machine translation, which has been around for quite a few years now. Machine translation has been found to be widely used by international students. Even if they're told they're not supposed to, they still do. They find it helpful for their writing. But the studies have also shown that they approach it critically and strategically. They use it in a nuanced way, and they don't want it to overtake their English learning. It increases the quality of their writing and aids learning, but it's better if they have some instructor guidance when they're using it. And there's a lot of talk in EAP about embracing translanguaging, and this has been argued to be a form of that. They're using it pragmatically. They're moving from one language to another language and using all of the linguistic tools at their disposal to do their work. Um, it's now integrated into common writing platforms like Microsoft Word, and this is similar to ChatGPT and AI, just being integrated to all these platforms that it's ubiquitous and basically unavoidable. Um, There's also been calls to allow the use of machine translation with clear guidelines to reduce the shame of a practice that already takes place. So students are using it, they feel like they shouldn't be using it because it's academic misconduct, but they're using it anyway. So probably it's a good idea to embrace it, but give the students instruction in how to use it well. So I think my argument basically boils down to that allowing EAP students to use ALATS makes it possible for them to initially express their ideas and arguments in unstandardized or emergent English or even their L1. This allows them to translanguage, and I love this term digital bilingualism, which I come across in this article by I think Zhu, Zhao and Groves, which I think digital bilinguals is what people are in writing now, not just our students, but kind of everyone. I know even in my second language, anything I'm doing, I'm always kind of checking on Google Translate to make sure it's right if I'm writing. Also, it facilitates authentic writing processes. By that I mean this is how writing is going to happen now. Even myself, so I used ChatGPT when I was writing the submission abstract for this presentation. So what I did, I was trying to get I had all my ideas, I'd done my research, and then I went to write the abstract, and I couldn't get the phrasing out. I couldn't get my ideas out because I find it hard to phrase things just as a first pass in academic English. So then in the end, I kind of just gave up, and I said, all right, I'm gonna write these in the way I would speak them in bullet points. So I did that, and I got them out really easily, and I had all these bullet points. I copied and pasted those into ChatGPT, and I said, can you rewrite this in academic English? And it did that, and the output was not really what I wanted to say exactly. So I went in and I edited and rewrote it and restructured it, but it got me past that barrier where I just couldn't get things down on paper, but on the screen. It also reduces the cognitive load and sociolinguistic labor that our students have to perform. By reducing their cognitive load, then they've got more sort of mental space to do the higher order thinking skills that we want them to learn as well, like criticality and evaluation and things like that. It also leaves more class time to do that sort of teaching. It also removes the double standard of L1 English writers being allowed to use ALATS without suspicion, like when I used it for the abstract for this. I mean, no one knew. I don't know if anyone really cares. Maybe there are some people out there who cares, but I don't think many people would. There is one caveat to this approach, and it's quite a very big one, is that because it's so easy to transform language now into academic English, that's only going to reinforce its dominance in academia. And what we need is more linguistic variation, instead more representation. But I think this is a problem that needs kind of top-down structural changes, societal changes, and that's not that would be like a whole nother presentation or a PhD. Here what I'm talking about is our students now in the context they are in now and the standards they have to meet right now. What can we do to make it fairer for them? So I'm going to talk about how I implemented this in a module. I teach pre-master's students. We have 4 groups and there are 2 tutors. I teach 2 of the groups. I have a co-teacher who teaches the others, and I'm the module lead. At the end of the term, they have to do a 1,000-word essay. We had to make sure that the work was the students' own ideas. We had to make sure that they adhere to the university and college guidelines, which are that the writing hasn't originated from AI technology and that ChatGPT hadn't been used to write the assignment. So in 2 of the 4 classes, so in my classes, I fully integrated ALATS as much as I could. My co-teacher wasn't as comfortable with using them. She's not as familiar with them. So I said, that's fine. You don't use it. You do it, the way you know how, more traditional way. And that way we can keep the groups separate and we can see what the outcome is. So an example is in my classes, the students would learn the skills in the kind of old-fashioned way. So like paraphrasing, I would teach them paraphrasing, the steps you go through to paraphrase. They would evaluate their paraphrasing and see if they'd done everything they needed to do. And then they would use Quillbot to paraphrase the same sentence that they started off with, and then they would evaluate that and compare it to their own work. And in the end, they saw that actually their own work was a bit better. It changed the sentence structure more than Quillbot did. So they were learning to use it critically rather than just kind of as a crutch, like getting the output and using it. They had to submit an outline for their essay a couple of weeks beforehand. This is to kind of show they're working. And just before submission, they had to do a verbal defense in a class, talk about their ideas. So if they could explain to me what they had researched, what they were discussing in their essay, what they'd found out, then I was pretty happy that the work was their own. Also, I integrated the topic throughout the term. So the topic for their essays was they had to find a controversial topic within their field and they had to evaluate it. During the term, we wrote a collaborative essay in class, kind of step by step, and the topic we chose for that, or I chose for that, was AI writers in EAP. So then because they were considering this every week, every lesson, they become familiar with the benefits and the downsides of it. So one example again is a ChatGPT lesson I had with them. I did 3 tests using ChatGPT to write an essay. So the first one, I input the essay question only and got ChatGPT to write the essay, and the students evaluated it, saw that it was like the language was good, but the structure was not great, and it was a bit repetitive. I then put an essay outline that we'd done together in class into ChatGPT and got the output, and there they could see that the structure was better. And I said, well, where did the structure come from? Well, it come from us. So the output you get from ChatGPT is only as good as the input. I also, then the next test I did was I put in a paragraph written in fairly simple English that my students would be capable of doing. And then I asked it to rewrite this in academic English. And this, I think, is a fair usage. So it's a language adjustment rather than just creating the writing for the student. So the students also did a pre and a post-class survey because I wanted to see how their attitudes changed after having this lesson. And here's some of the results. So you can see in each of these questions, I feel that I understand the benefits of using ChatGPT statements. I feel that I understand the downsides of using ChatGPT, and I understand the best way to use ChatGPT to help with developing writing skills. They all moved after the lesson more into the to being more agreeing with these statements. They clearly were more confident with how to use it in a productive way. And this was just after one lesson. So there wasn't even a lot of other lessons where I fully really integrated ChatGPT. Sometimes I would mention it and tell them the things I could do. So I think this would only increase with more integration into the lessons. The guidance I ended up giving them was that using it to write for you is not okay, but if you use it to correct or to adjust the writing you have created yourself, then I think that is fair use, and it abides by the guidelines given by the university and the college. And an additional rule of thumb I kind of figured out while I was teaching the term was that to use it like a tutor, I would love to be able to give them individual feedback on their grammar and their vocabulary, but I don't have enough time, and I have big classes, and we just can't do that. But this is the type of thing they can ask it, and ChatGPT is good at language. That's what it is. It's a large language model. So it's not good at facts. It'll create incorrect facts. It'll make things up. But language is what it does, is what it's for. And you can ask it and put something in and say, is this a good thesis statement for this essay? Give me some feedback on this essay. What structure should I use? All these questions that they would be able to come to me for if we had more time and I could help them all individually. They can ask ChatGPT, and it does get some things wrong, but then so would I probably. But it's quite good at that. The results were that most of the submitted essays were indistinguishable from like local students in terms of language use, so their language scores were kind of right up the top. The content and structure, though, did match the expected level of individual students, so their levels did kind of pan out in those marking criteria. But they weren't like hugely inflated, their marks in the end. They were, they turned out fairly what I expect, but a little bit up in terms of language use. In the groups, my groups with with the ALAT integration, there was only 2 out of 45 serious unfair practice cases, but there was about a 50% unfair practice case in the groups without ALAT integration. I wouldn't argue that that's all down to being taught about ALATs, because there's a lot of variables that aren't controlled for, like we're different teachers. But it's definitely something that needs to be looked into. It's quite a big difference. I asked them a few other questions after they had submitted their essays. I sent a survey out, and I got about 37 respondents, and 25 have said that they use some sort of tools. You can see mostly they're using Grammarly and Microsoft Word. Some used Google Translate. There's not that many using ChatGPT, but some did. The ones that I think these the way they've answered the numbers don't quite add up. But the ones who have used it mostly used it to correct writing. Some admitted they used it to write for them, but they're fairly minimal. So my suggestions are that we fully integrate ALATS into writing and also reading, because it can be used for reading for simplifying academic text. As an authentic text creation process. This is how writing happens now, and if we move all of our writing assessments into exam conditions, then I don't think the students are really learning how to authentically write academic texts. Writing academic text is messy. It's a messy process. It's not like sitting in an exam writing from the introduction down. You write this bit and a little bit of another piece, and you put them together and you take things out, and it happens over a period of time. Also, this will incentivize students to use them productively, because at the moment, the message that tutors and students are getting is that ChatGPT is this thing where you put an essay question in and it writes the essay for you, and that's the only way they kind of know how to use it. But actually, there's plenty of other really productive ways to use it, and once we start telling students about this, and I think they're much more likely to use it in those ways, because they want to learn. They want to learn English, and they want to be able to they don't want to go through their whole degree just cheating the whole way. I think sometimes they're just forced, they feel like they're forced to do that because they don't have time or they don't have the tools they need. I think we need a change of sub-skill focus. So instead of just purely production with writing, the skill is going to be more towards reading. So you'll put something in and have the language adjusted or corrected. Then you'll have to judge the output, because it's not always going to be right. You need to be able to judge whether that's what they meant to say, whether the grammar is what they need, and proofreading, like structure and things like that. Students have to show the working of the text creation process, so I've kind of stolen this idea from mathematics. Show your working, show how you got to there. That's what my sort of verbal defense is about. And also more speaking involved in assessment. I'm going to have more time for that, because we're not doing that kind of fiddly surface level kind of grammar and vocabulary. I think basing argumentation more on verbal skills is a good idea, and also academia is more accepting of linguistic variation in speaking as well, so that's an additional benefit. And I think we also need to use caution when identifying academic misconduct by comparing the students' in-class work to their submitted assignments that they've done at home, because of course that's going to be better. For one thing, they've had longer to do it and to proofread it and to check it and to change it. Secondly, if they can use these tools, it's going to be much better. So I think those days of being able to identify academic misconduct like that are kind of going, if not had gone 6 months ago when ChatGPT came out. Also, if we're going to do it that way, first thing, it's kind of a subjective judgment. It's also kind of making the students kind of walk this line of come and do our courses and improve, but don't improve too much, otherwise we'll get suspicious. So along those lines, I think we need to trust students to use ALATS instead of viewing all of any high level language with suspicion. And also institutional agreement on ALAT use is essential as well, and we're still working on that in my institution. So in conclusion, not only is it preferable to let students use ALATS for writing in terms of practicality and to reflect authentic writing practices, it's also the ethical thing to do from a social justice standpoint, I think. And it's a good opportunity because we can begin to break down these barriers, these historical barriers that are a direct result of colonization, of racism, and linguistic discrimination. So we can do something to level the field. It's something practical. There's lots of talk about decolonization in the curriculum. People kind of wonder what practically we can do to get to this, and this, I think, is something that can be implemented fairly quickly. To allow students to break down the barriers that they face entering into academia. So that's the end of my talk. I do have some references here, but I think my camera is going to be, my video is kind of in the way of them, but slides are available online, or you can contact me for the slides if you want to know more.